Oh, thank you. Stephanie says I sound great. Awesome. Good. I'm using my headset. So hopefully the sound quality is good. Awesome. Thank you, Shanna. Okay, great. I'm keeping an eye on comments. So anytime you want to say something or ask a question, I will be keeping an eye on that. If you're wondering who's speaking, it's Abby Wilson. I'm an artist here in Nelson. I'll be kind of going through this color theory session, sharing a little bit of theory about how to use colors to create beautiful artwork, designs, coloring, what have you. Um, and going through, yeah, a bit of theory and then a demo, and then there'll be a coloring contest. So, might as well get started. I see quite a few folks on the line. That's great. All right. So, the reason we're doing this today is I've just published a coloring book called Kootenai Coloring, and it's got 25 pages of local landscapes from Fletcher Falls to Monica Meadows to Idaho Peak. It's just a really fun book, and if you like coloring, you might be interested in knowing how to pick which colors to use, how to be intentional to get the most out of your work. But even if you don't like coloring, but you like design or artwork or photography, this should have something for you to kind of understand how color theory works. So we're going to do a coloring contest at the end, which I'll share details for. But if you're interested in the book, it is out now in local stores, including the Touchstones gift shop. And I'm happy a portion of all sales is being donated to the Nelson Community Food Center. So it's just a great little gift to give, a good stay inside, indoor COVID activity, and you'll support a local store, the food bank, and me as well. So let's get started with actual color theory though. Going to go to our next slide. So this is kind of what we're going to talk about today. What is color anyways? We're going to talk a little bit about the properties of color, some terms that artists and designers use. We'll take a look at the color wheel, and then we're going to kind of talk about common color palettes in design, and then get into how to plan your colors if you're starting something new, and we'll do a little demo. So this is kind of like a talk and a demo. If you are someone that has art supplies around, you're welcome to have them on hand and play around as we go through things. You're welcome to kind of create a color wheel with what you have if you want to be a little bit hands-on, but it's also just fine to tune in. This is really just more of a talk and a demo. And like I say, I will be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions, there's time at the end, but I'll also be keeping an eye if something comes in. Okay, so let's get started with what is color anyways, because we see it all the time, but we might not always think about what it is. So color, this is a kind of a combination of physics and biology. It's the way that we see light. And when light comes in, there's sort of a spectrum, depending on what wavelength we're seeing in terms of electromagnetic radiation. So the top thing, that's sort of the visible light that most humans see, right? On one end is purple, on the other end is red. So we see this beautiful spectrum, and you might notice this in real life too. Anytime you see a rainbow, see I got a bottom picture of a beautiful rainbow over Nelson, BC. That is sort of light breaking into that spectrum, and you can see that phenomenon in real life. So color is just the way we see different types of light. And like I said, this is kind of what most people see. There are people out there that are colorblind, so they might not be able to see certain parts of that light spectrum. It's also thought that there's people that are called tetrachromats and can really see very subtle differences in light. So it's kind of neat. And both types of people can be amazing artists and just bring a different way of seeing light and color to the work they do. The other thing that's cool about this, I think, is this is really how most people see light, but other creatures can see beyond the light spectrum that we can see. So there are insects out there that can see into ultraviolet light, which is invisible to human eyes. And there's reptiles out there like snakes that can see infrared light on the other end of the spectrum. So just because we see, there's we might see something, but other things can see more. So I just think that's so interesting about biology and physics. So that's all that color is. But as humans, we do add meaning sometimes to color too. So we might see a certain color, but keep in mind we could add a subjective meaning. We could have memories around certain colors. Different cultures might have different stories about what different colors mean. We could consider some colors more natural. We could consider some colors more lucky. So just because we see something physically, there's also always in the world of art and design, there's that extra layer of meaning that people bring to things. So that's something to keep in mind too, working with color. So we're going to go into some of the properties of color. This is going to be a few terms that artists use when describing color. So bear with me, and maybe you've heard these before, but if you haven't, we'll just get into them now. So on this slide, we can see a bunch of colors. The middle, though, it's all the same shade of green, okay? So to kind of explain this and break this down, I'm just going to use that same shade of green, and then we'll talk about how things change. So the first property that color has is the idea of hue. And hue is really just what color is it? Hue is what part of that light spectrum are we seeing? Are we seeing the part that we see as green, or are we seeing a wavelength that we perceive as red? So when artists use a fancy word like hue, it's just what color. The other things, though, are quite important. So number two is the idea of value. And value is how dark or light a color is. So if you're talking about green, do you have a really dark green, a dark value? Or do you have a light green, a much lighter value? And it's fun to play with beautiful, exciting colors, but you do need to keep in mind this property of value. That's really important in order to make a piece or a design really work well. The third thing property has, we talk about it having kind of a brightness. So you can have dull colors that are more like grays or browns, and you can also have super bright colors that are maybe more like neon. So there's that same green again. On the one side, it's more shifted into like a gray green. On the other side, it's a much brighter, more exciting neon green. Okay. And the last thing we talk about is color having temperature. Whew, that's a lot. So temperature, and this will make more sense once we look at the color wheel, but it's the idea that certain colors are warmer or cooler. So if we look at green, a warmer green might be a little more yellowy, and a cool green might be a little more bluey. We'll talk a little more about why that's important in design in a bit. But just high level, it's fun to put many colors together, and we're going to get into that. But even just dealing with one color, like one single green, you can create a huge amount of variety just by playing with these things. You can play with the value, brightness, the temperature, and you can create all kinds of different shades of green. So if you are someone that wants to play around and have some art materials, you can definitely give this a try. Maybe pick whatever your favorite color is, and see just how many different shades um, or values or brightnesses you can get out of that. So it's fun to play if you're mixing paint. With value, you can add sort of black to make it darker or white to make it lighter. For brightness, sometimes just a pure color on paper or white canvas will be really bright, and mixing it in with a little bit of gray will make it really dull. And temperature, like with that green example, if you add a little more yellow, it's going to be warmer, a little more blue, it's going to be cooler. So just within one color, lots of variation. But what most artists are interested in is mixing and combining colors, right? You can create a nice, beautiful design just using one color, but it can also be a little boring. So most designers and artists are going to use a combination of colors to make things work. And this is where we get into a really handy tool called the color wheel. I bet you've seen this before, maybe from art class or something. The color wheel is just a tool for organizing color, and it gives some ideas of how things work. And if this looks familiar, it's kind of like that rainbow we saw, that light spectrum. We have purples, and then we go sort of all around the spectrum, woo, over to red. And so the wheel has really just taken that light spectrum and it's joined it in the middle with this magenta color. So that's where it comes from. It's sort of trying to capture that visible range of bright colors that we see. And it's handy. So maybe you remember from art school days, out of this thing, you get the primary colors. You have your red, your blue, and your yellow, and then you can mix colors. So mixing blue and yellow, you get green. Mixing green and blue, you get like a blue green, or over here, a yellow green. So it can be a tool for understanding how to mix certain colors. But also in design, if you're not mixing colors, like maybe you have pencil crayons or markers, the colors are pre-done. It can be a really good tool to understand how to combine colors to make a really nice design. And that's what we're going to talk about. So with the color wheel, this is where we can kind of get back into the theory of warm and cool colors that we talked about with that green. And it was a little bit abstract, so let's see if we can make more sense of this. In art, there's this theory that we have things called warm colors, and that's the set of colors at one end of the color spectrum that are kind of fiery, like reds and oranges and yellows. And if you're using them in a design, the theory is those warm colors are going to pop forward. On the other end of the color spectrum, you have violet, blue, and green. And those are kind of like, they're just called cool colors, like watery colors. And the idea there is that they're going to sort of fall back in design. So maybe they work better in the background, whereas warm colors might work better in the foreground. And part of it's kind of how your eye notices things. You're going to notice for sure bright colors and contrasts, but often those sort of warmer colors you'll see in the foreground. And if you think about nature, like if any of you guys have gone up on hikes up in the mountains and you look out in the distance, you'll see the horizons often very blue and faded. The colors aren't as bright, it's cooler. And things that are close up are brighter and warmer. So this kind of works with how we just perceive things in nature, but it's also a really good tool to use in design. And a lot of artists, when they're planning designs, they're going to try and keep this in mind in terms of what they want in the foreground, what they want in the background, and also to have a nice variety of color. So we're going to look at a few really common color palettes that artists use to kind of introduce you to some ideas using that color wheel. And if you're someone that has art supplies in front of you, you can certainly play around with them to create your own color wheel as we're talking. Oh, and I did get a question here from Lynn, so I'm just going to jump back. Why does the warm and cool colors meet at the top of the wheel? It's both warm and cool. That's a great question, Lynn. So the colors join together because this is sort of a model for mixing paint. So kind of around magenta and bright green, those warm and cool colors mix. And this is where artists, it gets a little complicated, but they start talking about warm and cool greens or warm and cool purples. So is magenta a warm or a cool color? It might depend on what's around it. It's definitely warmer than this purple over here, but it's sort of getting more towards blue than this red. So it's not like a perfect line where warm colors stop and cool colors start, um, but it's just sort of a model for understanding what's going to pop forward. There is a theory out there, and you can find more about this on YouTube, that magenta doesn't exist in real life because remember that light spectrum. On one end was purple, and on the opposite end was red. And here to make this wheel, we join them together. Um, but there isn't just there isn't really a wavelength of light out there by itself that's magenta. That's our brains taking purple and red together and seeing them in a new way. So that's kind of cool. Oh, I got a question from Alexis. Is it just the warmth and coolness that affects what attracts the eye? Like if you had a really bright blue and a dull red, would the red still pop forward more than the blue? Good question. Yeah, it's not just the temperature, it's also the value, how light and dark things are, and the brightness, how dull and bright things are. So in your example, a dull red with a really bright blue, probably the blue would come forward, but it might depend on what's around it. So if you have art supplies, you can play around with that by trying things out and seeing when you combine different colors, which ones pop forward, which ones fall back, what do you notice first? These are really great questions for design. Okay, so some common color palettes. I'm going to go through ways artists use the color wheel to create designs with examples from local artists from around the region. And I definitely encourage you guys, we're going to go through 5 examples from more simple to more complex. But I encourage you guys, next time you're out and about, if you're at a gallery or looking at design work, or even ads in a newspaper or magazine or internet stuff, Instagram stuff, whatever, if you see some nice design or art, see if you can figure out what color palette that artist was using. Like, how did they make it so nice? Um, these are common color palettes that make really beautiful designs together or harmonious designs. If you get too wild and crazy with colors, it can get a little bit messy. So this is kind of a theory of just choosing a few simple colors to make a really nice design and basing it around that. So we're going to start simple and get more complex. The first type of design, which is really nice, is where you use colors that are side by side on the color wheel. And that's called a set of analogous colors. So, for example, blue, turquoise, green, those are colors all side by side. When you do that in design, you're creating just a nice set of harmonious colors that kind of transition together. So it's a beautiful set. There maybe isn't a lot of contrast. You might not have that sort of warm, cool balance, but it can often be very peaceful and just simple and just nice, like in nature. So that's a really simple design. Look around and see if you spot any of that next time you're out. Here's an example. This is a painting down at the Touchstones gift shop right now. It's called Nelson, BC by a local artist, Renee Harper. And when I look at this painting, I see a lot of those beautiful, cool colors, blues, teals, greens. That's sort of the main colors in this piece. You'll also notice she's got a really nice mix of values. So there's some really, really dark colors, almost black, and there's also some really, really almost white colors. So even though she's using kind of like a set of colors side by side, she's created a beautiful range within those colors. So there's an example of a really nice piece using that design. The next type of common design for colors is what we call complementary colors, and those are opposites on the color wheel. So maybe you remember this from art class too. But anytime you take opposite colors, it's thought that they just pair really well and make a nice design together. And the nice thing about this, it's pretty simple. It's just two colors to base the design on. And you're automatically going to get a balance between a warm and a cool color when you use opposites. And you're going to create contrast. So really great thing. You're going to see this a lot when you look at design. Here's a great example we see around town a lot these days. This is the Nelson Public Library Centennial poster designed by local artist Douglas Jones. And I thought this was a really beautiful example, and it's great because today is the last day that this exhibit's open at Touchstones. So if you want to head down there after and go check it out, you can. They're open till 4 today. But this really beautiful poster, look, you've got turquoise kind of teal colors, and then you have bright kind of reddy orange colors in that pop forward. So it's also a nice example too of those cool colors falling back. The blue kind of turquoisey in the background, and then the bright warm colors popping forward. I don't know if you can see this too. Just the way he's used kind of color, just like in the hat. If you look, just for an idea of that warm and cool idea again, the shadow color is kind of like a green, but it's still kind of similar to this orange brim of the hat. But you definitely have that kind of cooler shade in the shadows and that warmer shade in the light. So that's a really nice, effective use of color theory. Okay, next we're going to get more complicated. Another palette that's out there um, are when you take colors that are almost opposite on the color wheel. So artists sometimes call these discord colors. They sometimes call them a split complementary color. It's basically like you find the opposite. So blue is opposite to orange. And then you take the colors on either side of that opposite. So in this example, red, orange, or kind of gold. So that's a little more complicated. Now we're working with three colors instead of two. But you're going to always get that nice contrast and mix of warm and cool and a nice balance. By the way, when I use the word palette, a palette is just the set of colors an artist or designer uses in their work. So anytime you're picking a set of colors to use, you're building a palette, whether you're mixing paint or taking out your favorite pencil crayons or whatever. That's all that is. So let's look at an example of this. Another local artist, Lainey Benson from Nelson. Um, this is a beautiful piece. I don't think this one's at Touchstones, but she does have other work there right now. And so same kind of palette we just showed, that blue color, and then sort of taking the almost opposites, you've got that sort of red orange and that gold color in the leaves. And that's a really beautiful design. If you look, she's kind of tied things together. So red gold in the leaves, it's kind of echoed in that gold color in the sky. There's also echoes in the reflection in the water. So really nice design. And using like a more limited palette, it doesn't mean you can't have other colors in there. Like if you look at this, you can see she's got some greens and stuff in the city and a few little purples, but the main colors, like the main things you see are kind of the blues and golds and reds. So that's a nice example. All right, let's get more complex. So fourth one you can think about is using a triad from the color wheel. And this is where you take three colors that are equally spaced out and you create your design around that. So this is a little less common to see, but it is effective when done well. This is actually quite common back in a lot of design work in the 90s if you look at like old logos and stuff. But by doing this, taking three colors equally spaced, you're going to create a lot of variety. You'll have some kind of mix of warms and cools. So here, purple and green are a little cooler, contrasted with orange, which is a warmer color. And it's often quite playful. So a little more difficult to pull off, but can be a really nice effect. You can also do this, if you think about it, the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, are also a triad. So if you want to try creating a design just with those, um, you'll get them too. In this case, we have purple, orange, and green, the secondary colors. They make a nice triad. So let's look at an example. This is from Miria Valhalla. She's an artist out in Robson, just outside of Castlegar. And this is her painting Betwixt and Between. When I look at this, I see that kind of triad of really strong oranges and greens in the background, but also quite a bit of that sort of purpley magenta showing through in those trees. So it's a limited palette. You don't see every color of the rainbow in here, but you see a really sort of mix or sort of strong dominance of those kind of oranges, greens, and purples in here. So it works really well together. It's quite playful and bright and exciting. Okay, one more before you get too overwhelmed. The last one to think about is called a tetrad. And this is the idea of taking four colors on the color wheel. They could be equally spaced apart, or they could just be two pairs that are opposites, two complementary pairs, like we said before. So we're getting a little more complicated, but anytime you're taking four colors that are opposites or two complementary pairs, you're going to have those complements happening. You're going to have a mix of warms and cools. You're going to have a nice design if you're careful with it. And we'll talk about later how to be careful with your design to try not to get too crazy. Um, yeah, but you'll have a nice mix. So this is a little more complicated. It's harder to find examples of, but take a look next time you're out in galleries or wherever. I found this painting by Balfour artist Brigitte Dubois, and I thought it had a little bit of a tetrad going on here. So when I looked at this, I saw some greens and pinks, that are kind of opposite on the color wheel. There's some sort of dark olivey greens, but also some nice soft pinks. I also saw some oranges in there and blues, which are another opposite on the wheel. So it's a nice painting of a barn, and you know, if you squint your eyes and look at it, you might not see all those colors, but once you look really closely, there's a lot going on in there. And I thought this kind of had the tetrad thing going. Okay, so that was five examples of different color palettes. And before we simplify things, I'm going to add one more layer of complexity, and that's the idea of neutrals. So what are those? Neutrals are like grays, browns, kind of blacks and whites. They're those colors that are a lot duller. So there may be like more natural looking colors, and they're important in design because if you're getting really wild and crazy with your colors, your whole painting or design, it might just be a whole bunch of really bright neon colors and might not make a lot of sense to the viewer. So often when you're working with bright colors, you also want to think about using some of these more neutral colors to create balance. And we'll look at an example. Also, if you like to do maybe more realistic work in nature, you'll see a lot of neutrals show up in landscapes and things. And you can create a lot of variety. So if you look at this set of neutrals, you can see some that look a little more purpley or a little more orangey. but they're not bright purple or bright orange. Okay, they're toned down. So just like when we talked about that bright, dull contrast of a color, neutrals are kind of on the dull side and they create balance in a composition. So let's look at an example. This is from Rosalind artist Stephanie Gauvin. It's her painting Helby Island from the coast. And if you look at this, so in that beach scene, she's got a huge, beautiful variety of neutral colors. There's all these little different shades of grays and browns and things. But also in there, she's got these bright pops of little colors. So if you can see, there's like these little pops of red and orange and blue. And I think those are made all the more exciting because they're surrounded by more neutral colors. So that's just a really nice example of using neutrals. There's some brighter colors in there too, but also neutrals kind of make the whole thing a little bit peaceful, calm, natural. It's important to consider when creating pieces. All right, so we're gonna kind of tie this all together, but the main thing to take away is you do want to have some variety. Um, that's gonna kind of make things more exciting, um, and just whatever color palette you're working with, it's gonna tie things together. Oh, I have a question from Alexis. Is a pastel ever a neutral? Yeah, so a pastel is a lighter color if you think about it. So if you take a pink, a light pink, um, it's so a very light shade of pink would be more neutral than like a normal pure pink. But more of like a gray kind of pink would be more of a neutral when we're talking about color theory, or kind of a pinky brown color. So just taking a color and adding white and making it really, really light doesn't necessarily make it a neutral color. It's still going to have that strong color. Um, but making it a little more gray or brown will make it more neutral. So if you look at this piece, there are some pinks in there that are a little brighter, and there's also some kind of pinky browns and pinky grays. Okay, so variety is important. So whether you're working with one color or two or four or whatever, you want to have a mix. So going back to those first things we talked about, you want to have variety between those warm and cool colors. Even if you're just working within one color, like we saw with green, you can create a variety within green of kind of having that yellow green or blue green. You also want to have variety between values. So you want to make sure you're using darker colors and lighter colors to create balance in your work. And then lastly, you want to have some variety between bright and dull or neutral colors. And this is particularly important if you want to do a painting with like something really bright, like a big hot pink wildflower. You want to try and create some maybe like dark neutral colors around it to really support it so it jumps forward. If you surround a bright pink wildflower with neon green leaves, it's not going to stand out as much. It's not going to be quite as exciting. So it's kind of thinking about what you want, taking a little bit of the opposite. If you're creating a light color, maybe surrounding it with some darks is going to make it a little stronger. If you want something to fall into the background, maybe making it a little more of a cool color or more neutral is going to help. So it's a lot of theory to pull together, but the more you kind of do this and work with color palettes and just even go out and notice things when you're looking at art or design in the real world, the more you'll start to see how this kind of comes together. So this is how I plan my colors when I'm starting something new. I'm going to go through a demo of this in a minute. Um, but really, so planning colors, um, when I'm starting something, I try and think about what color is the most important to tell my story. Sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. I do a lot of landscape painting. So often when I'm out hiking in the mountains or looking at my photos after, I'm seeing certain colors are really standing forward. Maybe I was hiking in the fall and I'm surrounded by golden yellow larches, and I'm thinking, like, in order to tell the story, kind of that gold yellow is going to be really important. Um, or maybe, I'm hiking in the spring and I'm seeing a lot of bright green things as new leaves come up, and I'm thinking, okay, bright green is going to be important. So trying to think about what are you doing, and from there, what color is going to be the most important. Once you kind of got a color or two that's going to be important, you can think about those 5 palettes we looked at. Um, having complementaries, analogous colors, tetrads, triads. And I will share the PDF of this after so you don't have to memorize it all if you want to go back. But think about what palette is going to kind of support that important color. Do you want to have a lot of contrast? Do you want to have it very sort of peaceful, almost sort of rainbow? Um, what's going to really tie things together? The last question is how are you going to create variety? So once you've kind of got like your color, your idea of what palette you might use, how are you going to support that? So with those things we just talked about, with dark colors, with light colors, with neutral colors, with bright colors, you want to make sure you have a nice mix and you're supporting what you want to do. So if you want maybe a bright yellow, you want to think about how you're going to support that. Maybe a dark kind of neutral purple color might help make a bright yellow come forward, working with that color wheel. Oh, I see a comment from Ivy. Ivy quilts, and she's going to hang these questions in her sewing room. Ah, that's great, Ivy. Yeah, and if you like playing with color, um, a few things. So you can make your own color wheel using the materials you normally use, whether that's fabric or pencil crayons or paint. You can create a color wheel just like we saw earlier. You can also go down to Cowan's and buy a color wheel. They sell ones that have a little map and include a bunch of color theory info, like reminders about value and neutrals and color mixing. So that can be handy too. But it is a handy tool to have if you're working with a lot of color, kind of having some questions and maybe a tool like the color wheel. Okay, we are going to do a demo of how this works in real life. So I'm going to kind of keep sharing my screen, but jump over to Photoshop. And I just want to show you something first before we get into like actual coloring. So if you have a program like Photoshop, or even maybe you have a little photo editing app on your phone, you can play around with changing the colors on things to get a sense. You can take a photo of something in real life in your room or a piece of artwork, or even just create like I created a green circle here. And then you can see you'll probably have some settings that allow you to play around. So in this Photoshop app I can adjust the color of that green circle to make it pink by adjusting the hue, or I can make it kind of more yellow or red. So this is kind of just sort of pulling the theory together. You'll see within that color, if you change the hue, you're going to get a different color. You often will have with photo editing software the ability to change the lightness, which is the value. So you can make it really, really dark, like a dark green, or really, really light. So this can be a way just to kind of play around with these concepts if you have a tool on your phone or whatever. And then you can also change the saturation often with photo editing. So I can make this green super bright, like a neon green. I can make it like pretty dark and dull, like more of a gray when I bring down the saturation or brightness. So those concepts that we just talked about with color and paint, they do tie together in, yeah, a lot of photo editing and images. And if any of you guys do photography too, you can also use these concepts when creating or editing photos. So if you're looking for nice compositions out in the wild, you can see, look for things that are interesting where you have a nice contrast of colors, you have warm and cool values. So we're going to do a quick little demo here, maybe about like 10-15 minutes of starting a new thing from scratch where you have to deal with color. And how are you going to plan that? So I'm just going to fit this on my screen a little better so I can all see. 50%, that's too, I'll just do here for now. Okay, so this is one of the pages from the Kootenai coloring book. And it's a painting called, or a page called Lyle Lakes. So if you've been to Lyle Lakes, it's a hiking trail between Caslow and New Denver here in the Kootenays, and it's really awesome. So if I'm starting with something from scratch, like this black and white line drawing, and I want to add color, I'm going to go back to those questions we looked at. So first of all, which color is the most important to tell this story? Um, and you can be totally creative and create something new, or you can also think about things in real life, which I often do as a landscape painter. So Lyle Lakes is really beautiful because it has this blue crystally turquoise sapphire water. So maybe in order to tell this story well, I kind of want to base my idea on they on using like a nice bright turquoise. So if I'm creating something new, maybe I'll start with like a beautiful bright turquoise blue and sort of throw that in the water as a starting point. Woo! To kind of start mapping out the design. So I've kind of got maybe turquoise is going to be the most important color to tell this story of Lyle Lakes. All right. The next kind of question on that list was figuring out what color palette's going to support that. So let's jump over here because I got a color wheel in this tab. If I'm looking at my turquoise color, which we agree is important for this scene, I could create an analogous color palette, by taking sort of blues and purples or greens, side by side colors. And that might be nice. But if I want to create a little more contrast, I might start thinking about working with the opposite colors or the discords. So the opposite of turquoise is kind of an orangey red, that tomato red. And that might be kind of bright. I don't know. Um, just gonna see color picker tool. Okay. Um, or, I could take the discord colors, which are kind of more of a red and an orange, and work with those to create contrasts. I could try and find the triad in this case, so kind of what are the opposites. So I think for purple, it would be something like, this is to do purple. I'm just gonna paint on here. This is what I need. So that, sorry, this teal color, kind of the opposite might be this gold color, and then like a triad over here with magenta. So that might be nice too. So kind of looking at the color wheel and figuring out what might work well for this. Um, so I think what I'm going to try for a little demo painting is probably not a triad because that's complicated and a little harder. But maybe just looking at kind of the opposite colors there. So let me, undo that. So maybe looking just sort of more at a cross at that orange, maybe a little bit at that red um, and gold color. We can also think about this too a little bit in terms of if we're using teal and orange, we can also think about sort of orange being the main color and then these ones sort of being the split complementary there too, right? When you're looking at the wheel. So you go in either direction there. So I'm going to try and bring in some of these warmer colors because I think I do want a nice contrast. So back to Lyle Lakes, I have to start thinking about how I'm going to block things in. I probably should think about if I go back to that blue, I do want to make sure I'm not just using each color once. So a quick tip, anytime you're doing something with a reflection or a lake or something, often the lake reflects the color of the sky. Now, mountain lakes are a little bit special because they can often be very blue just on their own under a cloudy sky, but they'll often be the brightest blue under a blue sky. So I'm going to make the sky blue too, but I'm not going to use that same shade of turquoise we used for the lake. I'm going to make it a little lighter so it's not, it's sort of resonating with the lake there, but it's not overpowering the lake, right? I've kind of got the idea of blue, but now I've used a lighter value. Okay, so let's get back to this idea of using some opposite colors. So the opposite of teal was kind of like a reddy orange from the color wheel. And if I do a really bright color like that, it might be, woo, a little bit ugly. So maybe I want to use some kind of softer colors, right? I don't have to use the exact opposite. I could throw that in somewhere, maybe in some small pieces. But I could also use some more lighter or neutral colors around that. So I'm going to take that opposite color. I'll just throw it in a couple little places so we don't lose it. That might make it kind of interesting since we've got a coloring sheet. Woo! But let's also try and get a little bit more of a neutral version of that. So I'll take our orange, and to get a neutral color, you can see my little color picker, we can bring it down towards more of a gray here or a light. If you're mixing paint, you're going to have to figure this out on your own by mixing. Or if you're using pencil crayons or markers, you can sometimes layer things to get different colors. Or maybe you have like a really nice bright set with different colors in there. So that's kind of like a gray neutral color there. Might balance it out a little bit. Anytime you're coloring something in, ooh, that's a little bit funky. I wanted to put it on the path there, but it's nice to have kind of a balance of colors working around. So maybe you're not just throwing one color in one spot, you've got it kind of mixed around the painting or design so it appears in a few places. So that's pretty neutral. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a brighter color. Lyle Lakes actually has some nice bits of sand around the shore, so maybe we can sort of brighten some of this up a little bit. We're still kind of working with a neutral, but it is based on the complement, right? That orange. So you can get kind of a nice, yeah, like a little sandy color in there and just play around. And with those nice colors in the lakeshore, we can also throw them up in the mountain too to create a little bit of balance. Now, my mountain's further in the distance, so I probably don't want to use like bright oranges in there. Maybe I want to try and use more like dull, cooler oranges. So a little bit more gray colors to create that mix. So it's not super bright. So now I've created kind of a light brown. So just to give you kind of an idea of, I'm not going to color every single thing here, but just to show you how we can start to kind of plan, right, around colors. So that might be quite nice there. Could put it in my mountain slope too, in my trees a little bit. Okay, yeah, so that might be kind of how I'm going to start this design. Now I can still introduce a few more colors. Um, you know, I could put green in because green's a very natural looking color. Um, if I do that, I want to be a little bit careful because green's analogous to teal, right? They're side by side on the color wheel. And we really want that nice blue lake to have contrast. So maybe if I want to try adding green, I want to pick something that's going to be not the same value or brightness, but like quite a dark green or something. So let's try that out and see how that looks. Woo! Yeah, so there's a little bit of a darker green. I might put that in some of my trees and stuff. But the idea here is, as you're picking colors, you're trying to think like, what are you trying to support? And here we're really trying to support the idea of this blue lake. If I want to do, green mountain slopes, like a nice bright green in the alpine, I can pick a color kind of like that, but it's going to take away from the lake if I'm not careful. Look at what happens if I pick a really bright color. Boof! Now that's standing out, and the lake has lost its effect. See that? That's kind of dominating the painting now, or the color now. So I want to be careful about that, right? This is really that idea of what is most important for the piece. If it's the lake, then everything I do has to support that lake. So maybe rather than a bright green, I'll pick like more of a neutral olivey green. See? And now the lake's bright again. Woo! So I can keep working on this to my delight, but I won't for the demo because I think you kind of get the idea of what we've done here. Is we started with figuring out the most important color to tell our story. We didn't just put it in there once, we might put it in a couple times, but kind of play with the value or the brightness or contrast so that we have a nice mix. Um, and then kind of going to our color wheel and figuring out what color palettes might be nice to support it. So turquoise, kind of an orangey red would be the opposite. So picking colors from there that are going to kind of create some contrast without overpowering. So yeah, I'm going to throw in, well, maybe we'll just throw in a couple dull little reds there too, because that was sort of the opposite. Yeah, I don't think I can color that one without doing the whole bush because I screwed up somewhere here. So just undo that and leave it for now. Yeah, so that is the idea of tying things together um, and how to work. And this is not easy or obvious. Sometimes it just takes practice and playing around. You can definitely, color stuff in Photoshop or an app to do a really quick version. Um, or you can certainly take photos of things and play around with those color and brightness and dullness settings to kind of see how things work. But the more you do it, the more you pay attention to color, I think the better you get at working with it and being intentional. So that's kind of our little demo there. Just going to go back here. All right. So the next thing we have um, is a coloring contest. Just go oops, down to. So this is a chance for you guys to try some of this for yourselves if you would like to. Um, you can basically, we're going to do this in partnership with Touchstones. Oh, I think I just pressed the wrong setting here. One sec. Go from current slide. There. So we're going to do this in partnership with Touchstones Museum. So if you'd like to do the coloring contest, you can. Um, Down at the museum, they have the coloring sheets available to pick up, or you can print them at home on my website. I've got 5 different designs that come from the book. So Idaho Peaks in the picture there. You can certainly get that one. Or there's a whole bunch of different ones. So if you want to participate, you can pick up or print a coloring sheet at home. Then you can drop it off or email it again to programs at Touchstones by November 30th, which gives you about 10 days or so. And we'll be kind of looking at the submissions, maybe me and Steph or someone from Touchstones, and we'll be figuring out, which ones are a really good use of color theory, looking at some of these things we talked about. And the winner will get a copy of that Kootenai coloring book, and also a gift certificate for the Touchstones gift shop, which you can use in person, or they also have a nice online shop now. So it's really easy and COVID friendly. So I want to say thanks for attending today. Once again, it was Abby Wilson speaking. That's my site there, Abby Wilson Art. And this was done in partnership with Touchstones. So you can check out their site there. They are open today until 4. If you want to look at, there's some beautiful artwork in there right now. Some of the paintings we looked at. Also just a great mix of other things. I think it's the last day for their library exhibition, which would be nice to check out too. Um, so yeah, definitely go down there if you're interested. They've got a whole bunch of COVID protocols in place to keep visitors safe. Um, yeah, and we're gonna kind of turn it over to see if there's any last questions before we wrap this up. So if you have a question, you can throw it in the chat box there, and I'll get to it. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye. So I'll just give a sec for questions. Woo. Oh, thank you for your comments. Yeah, Ivy said that demo helps the theory make sense. That's great. Oh, glad you found this informative. You can use this for painting, design, for coloring. It's a great chance to get one of those free coloring sheets and just try the theory yourself with pencil, crayons, markers, whatever. So, um, anytime you're working with color, really, this is great theory to keep in mind. Yeah, we got a few quilters on. That's awesome. Yeah, if you're designing quilts, you're going to be working with blocks of color. So these are great things to think about for quilting. Yeah, thanks for the comments. Robin says she can hear me but can't see me. That's right, I'm not on video. Right now, Facebook makes you choose between going on video or sharing your screen. So you can only really hear me, so that's right. We have a question from Brianna. Is there a way to use color theory to relay distance, i.e. mountains close versus far? Yeah, absolutely, Brianna. So we kind of talked a little bit, certain things disappear or recede based on what colors are used. So let me just kind of go back to my presentation. I'm just going to take a look at a nice, oh, this is a pretty good one. This is the Stephanie Gauvin painting. So colors in the distance tend to get duller and they tend to get a little bit bluer, especially if you're talking about mountains and nature. So here, and in Stephanie's piece, maybe you can see some of the greens back here. They're a little bit duller towards the horizon. If you're doing like a really distance piece, so we'll go back to this painting by Lainey Benson. Um, she's kind of showing distance again with that idea. So further in the distance, the mountain is lighter, it's a little bit duller. Things might shift more towards blue. Things that are closer are going to be like a brighter, richer color. So that's a really good way to show distance. You'll see that in photography or anytime you're out in the mountains. Really just sort of pay attention and you'll see the colors start to fade as they get further away. Oh, Sharon said this is helpful for traditional rug hooking as well. Yeah. There's so many ways we use colors if we're doing arts, crafts, design work, graphic design, web design, user experience, user interface design. Whether you're very crafty or very techy, you could find yourself working with colors. So this theory is great. All right. Don't see any more questions. So we'll wrap it up. This video will be available as a recording, and I will post the PDF for my slides. So if you want to refer to something, you can. If you want to check out any of these awesome local artists, the links to their websites are in those slides as well. And yeah, I hope everyone stays safe, has fun crafting or coloring or whatever in this new indoor COVID world we're in, and just find some time to kind of connect and be creative. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you again to Touchstones for partnering with me on this. Stephanie Myers for helping me pull this event together. She's the Touchstones programming coordinator manager. So that's really great and hope to see you all out there. So take care, everyone. Bye.